The memory I held onto most tightly was of light. It was the summer before Ilara was chosen, the last summer she was truly herself. We were children then, Kaylin 10 and Ilara 12, perched on the granite shoulder of the great mountain that cradled our town. Below us, Silverwood gleamed a sanctuary of impossible architecture and serene genius, its crystalline structures catching the sun like a fistful of scattered diamonds. Ilara, her laughter echoing in the thin, clean air, pointed towards the new conservatory, its glass dome a perfect bubble of life. "I'll build one twice as big someday, Kale," she'd said, her eyes full of the fierce, bright fire of creation that was Silverwood's birthright. That fire was what they sought, and what they ultimately consumed. A month later, the choosing ceremony was held. It wasn't a celebration. It was a sterile, silent affair in the town's central chamber, a place of white marble and hushed reverence. We all stood, families clustered together, holding our collective breath. Alistair Finch, the town's leader and grandson of its founder, stood before us, his presence as calming and absolute as the mountain itself. He spoke of the burden, the sacred duty that kept our community pure, that cleansed the creative soul so that genius could flourish. "One mind bears the darkness," he intoned, the words echoing in the perfect acoustics, "so that 100 may create in the light." Then he opened the sealed envelope, and the name that fell from his lips was my sister's, Ilara. A gasp rippled through my parents. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles white. My father's face was a mask of profound sorrow, yet also a strange, terrible pride. Ilara, pale but composed, walked to the stage. It was the first time I saw the Synaptic Loom, a gleaming chrome chair surrounded by a halo of delicate, menacing machinery. As she sat, the town's physician approached, her with a needle. He began the tattoo on the nape of her neck, a single thorny line, the trunk of the tree that would one day consume her back. It was the moment the light in Ilara began to fade. 7 years passed. I was 17, a promising apprentice to the town's master architect, learning how to shape glass and steel into the soaring forms for which Silverwood was famous. But the pride in my work was always poisoned by the sight of my sister. The girl who had dreamed of building was now confined to her room, a ghost haunting the hallways of our sterile home. The tattoo on her back had grown into a monstrous, gnarled tree of thorns, its branches sprawling across her shoulder blades. Her episodes were becoming more frequent. One evening, I found her in the kitchen, her hands methodically stripping down and reassembling the motor of a nutrient synthesizer, a complex piece of machinery she had no knowledge of. Her movements were precise, efficient, and utterly alien. When I called her name, she blinked, looking down at the disassembled motor with a jolt of terror, as if she had no idea how it had gotten there. I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. The next day, I learned that Elias Vance, the town's chief mechanic for 40 years, had undergone his unburdening ceremony that morning. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place with Mr. Gable, the sculptor. He was a gentle giant of a man whose serene, abstract forms were celebrated as the pinnacle of Silverwood's artistic expression. After his unburdening, he seemed lighter, his face free from the deep lines of tension I'd never consciously noticed until they were gone. That night, our home became a prison of terror. Ilara began screaming about the dark, about the weight of the rock crushing her, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. She clawed at the walls of her room, convinced they were collapsing in on her the next day. Under the pretext of discussing a commission for a new garden sculpture, I visited Gable's wife. I steered the conversation to his past. She spoke of his youth as a miner in the world below, and with a sad fondness. She told the story of the cave-in that had trapped him for 3 days, a trauma he had never ever spoken of. The serene genius of his art wasn't born of peace. It was born of a memory he had ripped out of his own mind and forced into my sister's. That night, I tore her room apart. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in her childhood blanket, were her journals. The pages were a war zone. Her elegant script descended into a frantic, chaotic scrawl as she tried to fight the invasive thoughts. His guilt feels like acid in my stomach. It's a memory of a fist, a woman's cry. But it's not my memory. The shame is so heavy I can't breathe. Get out of my head. Another entry. Today I remembered how to tie a shvit knot. I have never seen the ocean. Her name was Anya. She was afraid of the water, but she died in it. Now I'm afraid for her. I wake up tasting salt. The journals were a litany of stolen lives, a chorus of silent screams she was forced to endure. She wasn't just bearing memories. She was being overwritten, her own identity drowning in the darkness of others. With the journals clutched in my hand, I requested an audience with the council. Alistair Finch received me in his office, a place of calm, minimalist beauty that overlooked the entire town. He listened patiently, his expression one of deep, compassionate concern. He didn't deny my claims. He reframed them. "Kaylin, what you see as a flaw is the very essence of the process," he said, his voice a soothing balm of reason. "Ilara is not just feeling their pain, she is metabolizing it. She is a crucible, purifying the collective soul. The confusion she feels is part of this noble sacrifice. Your love for her is making you misinterpret a sacred act as a cruel one." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "I worry that your grief is making you unstable. Such thoughts, if allowed to fester, can become as burdensome as any trauma." It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He twisted my evidence into a symptom of my own weakness. I left the chamber not just defeated but shaken, doubting my own sanity. The quiet war began the next day. My apprenticeship was suspended, my mentor explaining with regret that my distracted state was a liability. Whispers followed me through. "The town Kaylin is unwell. He's obsessed. He can't handle the pressure of our way of life." My parents begged me to recant, to apologize to Alistair, their fear of ostracism overriding their concern for Ilara. Silverwood's serene surface was a thin sheet of ice, and I had just punched a hole through it. I could feel the cold water rising around me. I had to escape. I packed a small bag with Ilara's journals, some food, and a compass, and fled under the cover of a storm. The journey down the mountain was a treacherous ordeal. The manicured paths of Silverwood gave way to forgotten, crumbling trails. I moved at night, hiding from the quiet hum of the security drones that patrolled the perimeter, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Every shadow seemed to be a threat, every rustle of leaves a guard. After 2 days, exhausted and scratched from the brambles, I found it. A small, cluttered cabin tucked into a fold of the valley, a thin plume of smoke rising from its chimney. This was the home of Dr. Eris Thorne, the neurologist who had been cast out of Silverwood for heresy 2 decades ago. He answered the door with a shotgun in his hands, his face a mask of suspicion. He was gaunt, with wild, haunted eyes, the ghost of a man who had already lost this fight once. It took me an hour to convince him I wasn't a spy, using Ilara's journals as my proof. As he read, the hostility in his eyes slowly gave way to a terrible, vindicated sorrow. "I told them," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disuse. "I told them the Synaptic Loom wasn't just transferring memories, it was causing cascading neurological degradation. I called it a machine for creating, savants and destroying souls." In his dusty makeshift lab, he showed me his life's work. He explained the pseudoscience that Alistair's grandfather had perfected. The loom didn't just transfer memories as a narrative, it imprinted the full sensory and emotional experience onto the archivist's neural pathways. The hallucinogenic drugs made the brain receptive, and the sedative ink in the tattoos suppressed the mind's natural defenses against such a psychic invasion. Alistair didn't just discredit me, he ruined me, Eris said, his hands shaking as he pointed to a stack of letters. He used his influence to have my medical license revoked, my research papers retracted. He painted me as a madman. Our work became a frantic race against time. We spent days hunched over Eris's outdated computer, but his genius for neurology was matched by a surprising knack for hacking. We broke into the encrypted servers of Finch Innovations. It was worse than we imagined. We found client lists for a dozen other exclusive communities and corporate retreats, all using modified versions of the Loom. We found hidden forums where wealthy families spoke in coded language about the difficulties of their own vessels. Posing as a concerned parent, Eris made contact with a woman from a community in the Sonoran Desert. Her son, their archivist, had fallen into a catatonic state. We weren't just fighting for Ilara, we were fighting a spreading plague. Then we found the file that chilled us to the bone. A notice was being prepared. Ilara's service was deemed complete. She was to be retired to the permanent care of the infirmary. A new 10-year-old boy, Finn, had been chosen. His first transference was in 3 days, and we discovered what the foundational memory was to be, the community's original sin. Witnessed by a 7-year-old Alistair Finch, Alistair wasn't just protecting a legacy. He was trying to bury his own traumatic memory in the mind of a child. He's going to use that boy as a tomb, I said, the horror of it settling in my gut. Then we'll turn his weapon against him. In his eyes for the next 48 hours, we worked in a frenzy. Eris designed a device to intercept the Loom's wireless transmission signal. My architectural training came into play as I deciphered the Loom's complex schematics, helping Eris find the exact frequency and data protocol to hijack. We were building a key to unlock a monster's mind. Sneaking back into Silverwood was even harder than escaping. We used our knowledge of the security patrol routes, moving through the dense forest like ghosts. We slipped into the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the town, a network I had studied in my apprenticeship. The air was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the bright, clean world above. We navigated by the faint glow of a handheld monitor, our hearts pounding with every distant footstep. We emerged into a small service closet directly adjacent to the main ceremonial chamber. Through a vent, we could see the entire room, the pristine white marble, the silent, expectant crowd, and at the center, the gleaming, terrifying Synaptic Loom. We saw Finn, a small, trembling boy in a white tunic. We saw Alistair, his face a mask of serene authority. "Preparing the machine now," Eris whispered, his fingers flying across the keypad of our device. A soft hum filled the room. But instead of the memory flowing invisibly into Finn, the main holoprojector at the front of the chamber flickered to life. The air shimmered and a grainy, life-size image of a workshop materialized. The crowd gasped. We saw two men arguing Silverwood's founder, a man we revered as a saint, and his partner. The argument escalated, their voices rising in anger. Over stolen research? We saw the founder's face twist into a mask of rage. We saw the shove, a brutal, impulsive act. We saw his partner fall backward, his head striking the corner of a heavy steel anvil with a sickening crack. And then we saw the most damning detail of all. A small boy, no older than 7. From the shadows of the doorway, his face a silent scream of horror. Alistair stared at the projection, his serene mask shattering, his face contorting with the agony of a memory he had tried to bury his entire life. The scene played on a loop: the argument, the shove, the crack, the silent scream of the child witness. Chaos erupted. People screamed, cried, and pointed. The foundational myth of their perfect world, the story of their benevolent founder, was revealed as a violent lie. In the pandemonium, I slipped out of the closet and ran for the infirmary. I found Ilara on a bed already hooked to a sedative drip. I ripped the 4 from her arm, lifted her surprisingly light body, and carried her out into the pandemonium just as the piercing sirens began to wail from the valley below. Arisa's call had worked. Federal agents swarmed into Silverwood, their tactical gear a shocking intrusion into the town's pristine world. They had been building a case based on our intel, and the live broadcast from the chamber was the final, undeniable proof they needed. Alistair Finch, no longer a serene leader but a broken man, was led away in handcuffs. The aftermath was a storm. Silverwood became a national scandal. The story of the Synaptic Loom, the archivists, and the network of elite communities built on stolen minds was on every news channel. I testified. Eris testified. Their guilt was a chasm between us. But for the first time, they saw Ilara not as a sacrifice, but as a victim. Ilara's recovery is the great project of our lives. The process is slow, an agonizing excavation of her mind. Some days, she is lost in the terror of a stranger's memory. But other days, there are flashes of light. Last week, she was looking at a picture of the mountain where we used to play. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I remember the sun on my face," she whispered. "That one's mine." It was the greatest victory I could have ever imagined. I never went. Back to architecture. The empty pedestals and gleaming facades of Silverwood seem like a cruel joke now. We have a new purpose. Not to build perfect structures, but to help rebuild shattered lives. The work is hard, the scars are deep, but for the first time in a long time, the silence is not one of reverence or fear. It's a silence of peace, waiting to be filled with the real voices of those who were stolen.